Mark Hunt had a roller coaster of an MMA career. The man who was on the brink of being paid to stop fighting became one of MMA's highest earners at one point. He would make $750,000 to show up and fight. But with a record of 13 wins and 14 losses with 1 draw and 1 no contest, how good was Mark Hunt actually? Hey guys, it's Kiiyon, and today we're going to take a look at the MMA career of the Super Samoan Mark Hunt. His career in the sport was monumental as he is the king of the walk-off knockout and was in some of the greatest fights in MMA history. But how good was a fighter with a losing record? Let's take a look right now. Mark Hunt, who before this was a K1 kickboxing world champion, made his MMA debut in 2004 in Pride FC against Olympic gold medalist in judo, Hidehiko Yoshida. In the beginning of the fight, Yoshida attempted to secure the takedown, but Mark was able to reverse the position and land on top where he began throwing heavy ground and pound. But when Yoshida was on his back, he attempted an armbar submission. This would eventually transition into a toe hold submission. But Mark got out and the fight got back to the feet where he denied more takedown attempts and once again landed on top where he threw ground and pound. Yoshida attempted another armbar off his back and this time he secured it, forcing Hunt to tap and lose his debut fight in MMA. Mark came back 4 months later to fight Dan Bobish. Dan was aggressive with the takedown, but Hunt was able to deny it with heavy knees that cut open Bobish early. Dan was finally able to take down Mark where he began to land shots from above and take his back. Bobish would also connect with brutal knees to Mark's head on the ground and attempt a neck crank. So far, Mark was receiving a beating in this fight. But he survived, and when the fight got back to the feet, Hunt landed an uppercut that dropped the exhausted Dan. After landing a knee and a kick, the ref stepped in and stopped the fight, handing Mark his first win in MMA. Following this victory, Hunt stepped in as a late replacement to fight Pride middleweight champ Vanderlei Silva. The fight was closely contested as both men connected with heavy shots early on the feet. Silva was able to secure a takedown and almost locked in the Kimura, but Mark would reverse the position and begin landing heavy ground and pound. Vanderlei would reverse the position again and would return the ground and pound. When the fight was back to the feet, Hunt would knock down Silva and continue to control him on the ground. In the second round, Mark knocked down Silva again and connected with heavy ground and pound from the top. The fight got back up and Silva secured another takedown and controlled Hunt on the floor. But Mark reversed Vanderlei and controlled top position until the end of the round. In the final round, Mark won an exciting scramble early as Silva tried to take his back. Back on the feet, he was pressuring Vanderlei with ease. Regardless, the fight went to the judges who awarded Mark Hunt the split decision victory, handing Vanderlei his first loss in 4 years. Mark's next fight was against Mirko Cro Cop, who he lost to at the 2002 K1 World Grand Prix. Cro Cop was the favorite going into this fight as he established himself as one of the best heavyweights in the world at that point. The fight opened up with both men throwing a bunch of kicks that quickly turned the match into a kickboxing battle. Mirko landed a few of his famous high kicks to the head of Hunt, but Mark ate these shots like it was nothing and continued to press forward with offense which consisted of punches and knees. Even though Cro Cop brought out the axe kick, Mark was unfazed by the shots that would normally put fighters down. Hunt was finding more success with his hands than Mirko, who had to be tired by this point as he was throwing so many kicks without his opponent going down even once. The fight ended with Mark rocking Mirko momentarily before being taken down to the ground. The judges gave the split decision victory to Mark Hunt, who upset one of the best heavyweights in the world. At Pride 31, Mark fought Yosuke Nishijima. He dominated Yosuke with his hands, kicks, takedowns, and even this move right here. But credit to Yosuke for taking all this punishment and continuing to press forward. After controlling the fight for 2 rounds, Hunt would finally land a right hand that put Yosuke to sleep. It wasn't a complete walk-off knockout, but I would still count it in his resume. After this win, Hunt fought Tsuyoshi Kosaka in the opening round of the Pride Openweight Grand Prix. He was the aggressor on the feet for a majority of the fight before finishing it in the second via TKO. In the second round of the tournament, Hunt fought former UFC heavyweight champion Josh Barnett. Barnett was able to secure the takedown early, and after landing some ground and pound, he would secure the Kimura that forced Hunt to tap immediately. After this loss, Mark fought Pride heavyweight champion Fedor Emelianenko. Fedor would take the fight to the ground where he attempted an armbar, but Hunt got out and was able to land some ground and pound from above. When the fight got back to the feet, Mark was aggressive with his striking. Fedor would attempt to judo throw Hunt to the ground, but would be reversed in the process, where Hunt was so close to securing an Americana. But Fedor escaped and would immediately go for a takedown of his own. He would go on to win this fight by securing a Kimura that forced Hunt to tap. Mark would be back a year and a half later to fight Alistair Overeem in the new Japanese fighting promotion, Dream. Although Overeem took this fight on 3 days' notice, he was able to secure the arm lock that forced Hunt to tap. Then on New Year's Eve 2008, Mark Hunt fought Melvin Manhoef. Mark came in rushing early only to be caught by Melvin, who went on to finish the fight on the ground by strikes. The fight lasted 18 seconds. Mark's next fight was against Gegard Mousasi in the opening round of the Dream Super Hulk Grand Prix. Gegard was able to knock down Hunt early and control him on the ground before securing a straight armbar under 90 seconds into the fight. At this point, Mark Hunt was on a 5-fight losing streak, making it 3 years since his last victory. And even though his contract was acquired by the UFC after the purchase of Pride FC, the UFC offered to buy out Hunt's contract, which was worth $450,000. I think the main reason being the promotion did not want to take in a fighter coming off of a losing streak like Mark's. But Hunt declined the offer and opted to fight instead, as he said he loved fighting and it was who he was. In his debut fight at UFC 119 against Sean McCorkle, he lost the fight 63 seconds into the first by another straight armbar, extending his losing streak to 6. At UFC 127 in Sydney, Australia, Mark fought Chris Tuchscherer. He dominated Chris on the feet in the first and even scored a knockdown. Then in the second round, Hunt connected with an uppercut that knocked Chris out so bad that Mark simply walked away. This was Hunt's first victory in almost 5 years. He carried the momentum to UFC 135 when he fought Ben Rothwell. In this 3-round war, both fighters connected on the feet and took each other down. But Mark was the aggressor and at one point almost finished the fight with an armbar. This performance earned him the unanimous decision. Mark's next fight was against Cheick Kongo at UFC 144 in Japan. The fight was quick. After the first 90 seconds, Hunt would connect with a left that stunned Kongo. He would get back up only to take numerous right hands from Mark before ref Herb Dean stepped in. After being sidelined due to injury, Hunt came back a year later to fight Stefan Struve in Japan. Mark was dominant in this fight as he was able to connect with shots on his taller opponent. In the third, he finished Struve off with a left-hand walk-off that broke Stefan's jaw. Now at this point, Mark Hunt was on a tear in the heavyweight division, which was completely unexpected due to the losing streak he had prior to his second fight in the UFC. But this definitely garnered the hearts of MMA fans who were rooting for the Super Samoan to continue to prove everyone wrong. He would fight 2 months later on short notice against former champion Junior Dos Santos at UFC 160. In the first round, Mark was tagging Junior early and overall the aggressor on the feet, but Dos Santos connected with a huge right hand that dropped Hunt. Yet Mark popped back up and continued fighting, which was wild. In the second, both men continued to swing at each other. At the end of the round, Dos Santos was able to secure a takedown. In the third, Mark was still the aggressor on the feet by throwing with volume and continuing to press forward. But with 45 seconds remaining in the fight, Dos Santos landed a spinning hook kick to the head of Hunt, who went down and was finished by the following strikes from Junior. It was an unfortunate loss to Mark, but there was no shame to losing to Dos Santos, who at that time was in his absolute prime. The fight was also considered to be one of the best heavyweight fights in UFC history, until Mark fought again 6 months later in Brisbane, Australia against Antonio Bigfoot Silva. The first round had both men feeling each other out on the feet and connecting with shots. The pace began to pick up in the second, where both men pressed forward and exchanged more shots. Bigfoot found success with kicks to the leg of Hunt, who was limping by the end of the round. The third round was the same crazy output that you wouldn't normally see in a heavyweight fight. Hunt landed a right that knocked down Bigfoot and the fight looked punches away from being over. Yet no matter how much ground and pound Mark would throw, Silva was staying in the fight and not giving up. In Mark Hunt's first ever 4th round, he took leg kicks early but managed to take the fight to the ground again. When the fight got back up, both men were exhausted but still swinging. At points in these exchanges, both men were on the verge of being finished, and that's what made this into an instant classic. Mark would attempt to take the fight to the ground but was exhausted and ended up on his back, with Silva making his way to the mount. When Silva made it there, he began raining down heavy ground and pound until the end of the round. In the final round, the war continued as both men engaged in exchange after exchange. But Hunt was the aggressor as he poured it all onto Silva, who surprisingly was not going down. But after the ref stopped the fight to check on Silva's cut, the fight resumed and Bigfoot began to connect with shots that backed up Hunt. I can't even show parts of this fight because it became an absolute bloodbath. The fight was declared as a draw and it was seen by many as one of the greatest fights of all time. What's even crazier about this fight is that Bigfoot tested positive for elevated testosterone, which would later change his draw to a no contest. The fight was also pivotal to contract negotiations with the UFC, as Hunt was close to retiring after the Bigfoot fight. But his wife convinced him not to walk away and to take the 6-fight deal with the UFC. Mark vowed that he would leave the sport after he fought out this contract. In a fight of granite chins, Mark Hunt fought Roy Nelson in Japan. As expected, both men went toe-to-toe to exchange. exchange, but neither of them were going down. Nelson would secure a takedown for a second before Mark popped back up. Eventually in the second round, Hunt began to back up Roy before connecting with an uppercut that knocked him out cold. Mark would come back less than a month later to fight for the interim heavyweight championship on short notice against Fabricio Verdum. Regardless, he was finally fighting for a UFC title, and in the first round he found success early with leg kicks and connecting with a right that knocked down Verdum. Hunt was the aggressor on the feet and even secured a takedown. It was a huge first round for Mark, and the momentum continued in the second when he knocked down Verdum for a second time. But Fabricio would land a flying knee that knocked down Hunt. He would proceed to finish Mark on the floor with strikes, thus becoming the interim heavyweight champion. In May of 2015, Mark Hunt went back to Australia to fight Stipe Miocic. In this fight, Stipe absolutely dominated Mark by outstriking him and taking him to the ground multiple times where he landed heavy ground and pound. Hunt found some success on the feet, but Stipe found much more. In fact, Stipe set a UFC record for most strikes landed in a fight, outlanding Hunt 361 to 48 over the 5-round bout. Mark lost the fight by 5th round TKO and went on to fight Antonio Bigfoot Silva in a rematch at UFC 193. Instead of another 5-round war, it ended in the first round by TKO after Mark connected with the right hand that dropped Bigfoot. Hunt fought again in Brisbane against former UFC heavyweight champion Frank Mir. Mark was the aggressor on the feet as Mir tried to take the fight to the ground but with no success. With 2 minutes left into the first, Hunt landed a right hand that knocked out Mir and gave Mark another walk-off KO. Following this victory, Frank Mir tested positive for the steroid Turinabol. And even though this fight was the second last one on Mark's contract, the UFC re-signed him to another 6-fight contract that saw Hunt earn $750,000 per fight in comparison to his last contract where he earned $160,000 per fight. So why did this crazy jump in pay happen? The biggest reason was due to Mark's popularity in Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, as whenever he would fight there, he would usually sell out the venues. Hunt's next fight was at UFC 200 against former UFC heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar, who was coming back to the UFC after being away for 5 years. The biggest controversy going into this fight was that Brock had an exemption from being tested by USADA. The fight went on and Brock was aggressive with taking Hunt to the floor and throwing ground and pound. Mark was able to connect with some shots, but not enough to outscore Brock, who continued to use his wrestling to dominate the fight. He would go on to earn the unanimous decision, but would later test positive for the estrogen blocker clomiphene. The loss for Mark Hunt would later be changed to a no contest. He would come back at UFC 209 in a rematch against Alistair Overeem. In the opening round, the two were swinging their powerful kicks at each other. They also connected with their hands as Mark was looking for the big over right hand. It was close, and in the second it would be just as competitive as the two continued to exchange. Overeem connected with heavy knees and Hunt rocked Alistair a couple of times before the end of the round. But in the third, the fight would end when Overeem connected with knees that knocked Hunt out cold. Mark went on to fight Derek Lewis in his home country of New Zealand. The two went to war by trading shots on the feet in a fast-paced first round. That action would continue in the second with some flying knees by Lewis and elbows by Mark. In the third, the momentum was shifting as Hunt was connecting more and Derek was fading away. His exhaustion carried to the fourth as he had no answers for Hunt, who was teeing off. The ref would step in and Mark would go home with the win and fight of the night honors. After this fight, Mark was set to fight Marcin Tybura, but the UFC pulled him from this fight after Hunt stated in an article that he would be fine if he died fighting. Mark was not happy with the UFC as he said they took the quote out of context. This would cause Hunt to say that he would not seek a contract extension after his current one ends. The UFC would allow him to fight again at UFC 221 against Curtis Blades. After finding success early by knocking down Curtis, he would be dominated for the rest of the fight by being taken down numerous times. After this loss, Hunt's next fight against Alexei Oleinik saw him as the aggressor on the feet early, but Oleinik would secure the takedown and eventually the rear naked choke before the end of the first round. In December of 2018 in Adelaide, Australia, Mark fought Justin Willis, who outstruck him en route to a decision win. This marked Hunt's third loss in a row and also his final fight on his contract. He would say in his post-fight speech that he'll see the fans somewhere else, indicating his time with the UFC is over. But ever since this fight in 2018, Hunt hasn't fought or even signed with the promotion. There could be hope in seeing him in the future in Bellator or a Japanese fighting promotion, but as of right now, his career seems to have come to an end. So after amassing a record of 13 wins and 14 losses with 1 draw and 1 no contest, a career that saw him as a top contender in the UFC's heavyweight division for years, how good was Mark Hunt actually? Mark Hunt could very well be the poster boy of what a brawler is in MMA. I understand the sport has a bunch of fighters like Mark who aren't afraid to trade shots with their opponents, but being the brawler in a division where the narrative of a fight can change with 1 punch is what makes Hunt's run even more impressive. He has one of the strongest chins of all time and it was tested plenty during his career. His kickboxing skills transitioned very well into MMA MMA as he used his leg kicks and knees to batter the body of his opponents. He would also use his powerful hands and elbows that would put fighters to sleep. Mark also had very good takedown defense and would sometimes even take the fight down himself to land heavy strikes from the top. But the most impressive thing Hunt had going for him was his love for fighting. Mark genuinely enjoyed getting inside a ring or a cage to fight someone. And when the fight became a war, it seemed to have excited him even more. And we all know that when a fighter goes into a fight with this type of spirit, they become beloved by the fans. And I think it was even more for Hunt, who came back from a 6-fight losing streak to become one of the best heavyweights in the world. I mean, how could you not root for such an epic underdog story like Mark's? I get that he doesn't have the most spectacular record, but for a guy whose game plan is to constantly enter exchanges with his opponents, it's understandable as to why he wasn't always the victor in his fights. And let's also consider the UFC fighters Mark fought who later tested positive on their drug tests. Some of these fights could have been wins had these fighters fought clean. And if that was the case, his record would have looked much different. In addition to contract issues and the promotion pulling Mark out of a fight due to being mentally unfit, it was no wonder the two parted ways on bad terms. But Hunt had the last laugh as he made $2.3 million in his last 3 losses. And that sums up the story of the Mark Hunt renaissance. A fighter who was seen as bad at one point, but he changed that narrative by showing the world how good he really was. My name is Kiiyon and this is my take on how good Mark Hunt actually was. Do you agree, disagree, or have something else to add? Please put it in the comments down below, cause I'd love to read it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. But that's all I have for now, so I'll see you on my next one.